You're listening to the REI Marketing Nerds Podcast, the leading resource for real estate investors who want to dominate their market online. Dan Barrett is the founder of AdWords Nerds, a high-tech digital agency focusing exclusively on helping real estate investors like you get more leads and deals online, outsmart your competition, and live a freer, more awesome life. And now, your host, Dan Barrett.
Hey guys, welcome back. You're listening to the second part of last week's episode. Let's jump back in.
Well, let me ask you, and we can keep this high level, right? Because I know there's a lot to this question, but a lot of people listening to this are going to be residential real estate investors of one kind or another. How would you recommend that they think about adding multifamily to their strategy, right? Like most people, I don't think would be able to drop everything today and go 100% in. So what's a way that they can start that pivoting process or start adding multifamily to kind of balance out their portfolios?
Yeah. I mean, I would just encourage them to do what we did, Dan, which is raise a lot of private money. Brokers, commercial brokers that control most of the deal flow in the commercial space, the multifamily space, the self-storage space, they're controlled by commercial brokers. Those commercial brokers will call on owners for 5, 10, 20 years until that owner is finally ready to sell. So it's really tough to compete. Here's my first tip. It's really tough to compete from an acquisition perspective for you to stand up your own acquisitions team when the commercial brokers are already doing that. They're already calling on these owners for years and years and years, developing relationships. So number one is make relationships with commercial brokers, guys at Newmark, guys at Marcus and Millichap, Colliers International, CBRE, Cushman and Wakefield. These big commercial brokers are in almost every big town. They are going to control a lot of the deal flow. Secondly, those brokers then, Dan, are going to want to know that you have what's called certainty of closing. Certainty of closing comes from your ability to raise private money. A bank is going to fund, let's say, 70 to 80% of your purchase. The other 20 to 30% is going to have to come from you or your private investors. That's known as a syndication, where you bring in a bunch of investors into that deal. And look, when I made the big pivot and we got into multifamily, the brokers started awarding us deals because they had a very high level of confidence that we could close, that we could get the money. And so while you're doing your resi business, start focusing on raising way more private money than you could possibly use in your resi business and use those dollars to take down your first multifamily deal. That first multifamily deal will probably be between, let's say, 25 and 100 units, somewhere between 2 million and probably $6 million bucks, somewhere in there, 2 million to 8 million. Let's call it a $3, $4, $5 million deal. You'll need, here's the rule of thumb, Dan, you'll need about 30% of the purchase price in private capital.
Okay.
So you buy a $5 million building, you'll need about 1.5 million. You need about 1 million for the downstroke and another 10% or another $500,000 for just your capital improvements, your closing costs, maybe paying yourself an acquisitions fee. So if you're successful with resi, keep doing it, but then over-raise your capital so that you can then approach the commercial brokers and know that you can close, know that you have that private money ready to buy that asset. That's what I would do. And that's exactly what I did do years and years ago.
So let's talk about, there's a perfect pivot because I wanted to ask you about raising money. I happen to know about you from our previous conversation. I was basically, this question I ask everybody, I'm like, what's your advantage in life? And you, without any hesitation, were like, I'm really, really good at raising. Right? Which is, if I had to pick a business superpower, it would probably be pretty high on my list. Maybe flight, and then being really good at raising. So, and you can take this wherever you like, but what do investors get wrong, or what mistakes do they make when they think about raising money? Because I think a lot of people are very confident, go into that very overconfident. A lot of people have the exact opposite reaction. They get very anxious about it, right? They think I can't possibly do that. So what are the mistakes that investors make when they think about or they approach the process of raising money?
Yeah, I can tell you right now, the biggest mistake is find the deal and the money will follow. That's not true at all.
Oh, okay.
Find the money and then you'll get deal flow that nobody else knows about. Okay. So I get a lot of off-market deals from brokers, essentially pocket listings that nobody else ever hears about because I've raised the money first. Funding equals freedom. So the biggest mistake is, hey, I'm going to go talk to brokers. I'm going to go look at a lot of deals. I'm going to talk to owners. I'm going to make a lot of offers. I'm going to make an LOI. I'm going to get it under purchase agreement. Then I'm going to raise the capital. By that point, you're already too late. You have to have some of the capital already warmed up to your deal. Okay. I have a friend of mine that just went into contract on a $9 million building. He had $450,000 of hard earnest money and lost it all because he didn't have all the funding to close. He came up on his contract close date. He couldn't close. He filed for an extension, asked for an extension. He got one because it was part of the PSA.
Right.
Second contract, he went into the extension. It came to the end of the first extension. He requested his second extension. It was in the contract, so he was awarded the second extension. Got to the end of the second extension, still didn't have the money. And it was a great deal. So it's not find the deal and the money will follow. So what I started doing was I started talking to investors. I started having one-on-one conversations, one-on-one Zoom calls, one-on-one lunches, and basically said, hey, these are the types of assets that I'm buying. These apartment buildings, they pay a preferred return. There's equity. My target, this is really high level, but my target return for investors is between 20 to 25% annualized return. And I would walk them through it. This is, I'm shortening up a 45-minute or an hour pitch down to like 3 seconds here. But at the end, I would say, I'm not assuming that you're interested in this at all. But if you ever come across somebody that would be interested in this type of asset with this type of collateral, getting maybe a 6 and 8, 10% preferred return plus equity, cash flow in perpetuity, equity in perpetuity. If you know anybody that would be interested in this, just keep me in mind as kind of the top of mind reference. And they would all, at the end, they would all say the same thing, which was, well, what about me? Okay. So
it's like the gut reaction is, well, I'm interested. You know what I mean? I'm like right here. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's funny.
I'm right in front of you. What about me? Right. So I took this approach of, I knew in my soul, in my heart, my brain, I knew everyone would be interested. I knew that this was something that would help all of them achieve their retirement goals. So I knew I had to go out and educate as many people as possible about real estate and about apartment buildings. I used to do it on residential before that and my private equity fund before that. But I felt absolute passion for teaching people that they could do better with their retirement money, their savings, and their investments by investing in these types of real estate deals, hard money loans, private money loans, real estate syndications. That's better than the stock market. And I knew that, Dan, because I used to be a financial advisor. Okay. Every financial advisor says the same thing: diversify and wait. And hopefully you'll get an 8 to 9 to 10% return. Well, there's so many other strategies out there to have a more consistent, predictable return. So I became passionate for educating people, but I also never took an aggressive sales approach. I always took the approach of, Dan, if I was pitching you, I would talk about your goals. I would talk about your objectives. I would use things like the SEC, Dan, requires that we have a prior existing relationship before I make you an offer. So if it's okay with you, I need to get to know who you are. I need to get to know what your investment goals are. I need to know what your risk tolerance is. So that's the approach I would take with investors. I would ask the questions. They would do all the talking. Well, the more people talk, the more they like the conversation, the more they like me, even though they're doing all the talking, right? So I took a very educational and inquisitive approach with investors. And then at the end, then I would say, well, this is kind of what I do. We buy these buildings. Let's say I buy this building for $6 million. I'm going to put $800,000 into it. By the time we're done, it's going to be worth $10 million. We'll be all in for 7. It's going to be worth 10. We're going to refi it. We're going to pay back all the principal to all the investors. And then the investors are going to get this equity in perpetuity, this cash flow in perpetuity. Hey, if you know anybody who's interested in learning more about this or interested in investing in these types of assets, just, hey, will you keep me as a top of mind reference? Will you refer them to me? And then they would be like, wow, what about me? And because I took that approach, Dan, they also were like, hey, Josh is not desperate for money.
Yeah.
Josh is taking this infinite game, this long-term approach. Josh is not desperate for money. He doesn't need money today. So now they're even more attracted to me because they know I didn't show up begging them to fund my next deal.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
so that mindset of education, infinite game, being inquisitive, asking questions, those are all parts of being a very successful capital raiser.
I love that. It reminds me of something that my friend Nick said once, where he's like, when you are marketing or selling to sophisticated people, right? So these are not people like just off the street. These are successful people, right? All successful people have the experience of everyone they run into basically all day, every day is asking them for money. So one of the things that you do to differentiate yourself is just don't, right? Is like, just say, how can I help you, right? It strikes me that the conversation that you used to raise capital, basically the same conversation you were having as a financial advisor, right? It's centered around their goals, their needs, rather than your goals, your needs. So does that sound right?
Exactly right. That's why I learned it. That's why I said in my story, this evolution, the idea of me learning about successful financial planning was that I have all these solutions, but I don't know if any of them is a solution for you. So let's do a fact-finding appointment first. Now, the Securities and Exchange Commission, when we do this private placement and this offering, the SEC requires that we have this prior existing relationship with the investor first before we pitch them an investment. That's a 506B federal securities exemption, 506B. So I use that to my advantage. And I tell this possible investor, this potential investor, hey, even if I pitched you hard today, I couldn't take your money. So there's no pressure here. I can't take your money. I have to have this relationship. We have to develop this relationship first. So if it's okay with you, I'm just going to ask you a bunch of questions and really get to know each other. They love that approach.
Yeah.
Right. Well, other people are like, hey, I made this offer. I found this 100 unit. It's $10 million. Oh, crap. I got to close in the next 60 days. Now I got to go hustle and talk to everybody. Everybody can sense now that you're desperate, that you need the money. So for me, it's the opposite. I warm all these people up. I put them on the back burner then. I keep them warm through marketing, content, podcasts, YouTube videos, email broadcasts, social media posts, all that. They stay warm, so they get this content from me. But then when I have a deal, now I'll go and set up a webinar and it will bring in, let's say 100 people, but I've only got room for maybe 20, 25.
Yeah.
Now, Dan, I've used this scarcity to my advantage. I've got all these investors warmed up, but I'm sorry, guys, I've only got room for 20 of you. So now they're jumping through the computer to invest in my deal. So I've got all the leverage on my side because I spent all the time to warm them up first, get to know them first. Now they want to do business with me. They're going to want to do business with you, but they can't do business until you find a deal. Now, when you go find the deal, it's easy to raise the money.
I mean, it strikes me that I love this idea of you are doing the work beforehand, before you need it, right? And that gets rid of this sense of desperation that you're talking about that people often bring to this process. I want to ask about, we're coming up on time. I don't want to keep you super late, although there's like a million things I already want to ask about this, but I want to ask about your podcast. You've got a podcast, I believe it's at acceleratedinvestorpodcast.com. Is that true?
Correct. Yep. Acceleratedinvestorpodcast.com. That's right.
So talk to me about, because I think this would be really helpful for people listening to this. We talk to investors of all shapes, stripes, and colors, right? So wholesalers and flippers and multifamily and syndicators and everything, right? Everybody deals with this marketing question of how best to market themselves and their business and them in the advisory capacity and all this stuff. And I think it will be clear to most people, right? Even though you really haven't done any like quote unquote marketing or selling on this podcast. I think people can tell by the way that you approach those issues, you are truly a world-class marketer. So I want to ask you about the role the podcast plays in your life and your business. Like, why do the podcast? And what do you see it as providing either to you or your audience or your business that is unique or special, right? Like what makes that something that you want to spend your time doing? I think
the long short answer is I totally did my podcast for selfish reasons. I did it to meet other people. I did it to learn things that I wanted to learn. I did it to interview people that I wanted to connect with and learn from or possibly JV with. The podcast was never like a way to build my email marketing list so I could sell them stuff. But that's one thing that you can do with a podcast, right? But I started it for very selfish reasons. And then I realized that it was a great way for me to have a voice, right? For me to tell my audience what I liked, what I wanted, for me to convey my personality through interviews and solo casts. Solo casts, I think, are critical. I think interviews are great, but your audience wants to hear from you. I think so. If you're going to host a podcast, you have to do solo casts also. I think it's a 1-for-1, one interview and one solo cast. So we push out 2 a week, 1 interview and 1 solo cast. But that to me provides so many benefits. First of all, my podcast, when I record them, they go off to a professional production company. That professional production company edits it, adds in like some mini clips or mini commercials, if you will. But they also help me write the copy around each episode. They produce it and then syndicate it. So it goes out to all the different podcast platforms and all the different video platforms. They help me write blog posts around it. So, but the benefit here is I get to record the podcast, the voice, my personality, my message.
Yeah.
And then it becomes all these other assets. Email marketing, social posts, Facebook posts, Instagram posts, podcasts, videos, and audio clips. It comes all those things because I record one time. So one of the things, Dan, I've said in many talks is that very successful entrepreneurs that have 8 and 9-figure businesses, they've scaled what I call the one-to-many concept. They record one piece of content and it gets out to many, 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 many people. Yeah. That's a must do for any successful entrepreneur. Okay. It's a must do. So the podcast really started off for selfish reasons. And then I realized, wow, like this really is the voice of my company. This is the voice of what we do. And it's allowed us to find deals. Last year, I did a JV on a deal that was a 552 unit in Houston, Texas. It was a $100 million deal. The guy that I partnered with and the group of people that we put together, some of them were already friends of mine. But one of the main sponsors did not know me other than my podcast. He reached out to me through Facebook, through Messenger. And within 2 weeks, we brought in a group to co-sponsor that deal. And it's a $100 million asset.
Wow.
And I own about 10% of it. Okay. So that came from the podcast. That was one benefit. Another benefit is the voice. Another benefit is it's content for social, for other places. Another benefit is we get a lot of passive investors that are interested in learning about our offers because they hear the podcast and they're like, wow, this guy really, we like his voice. We like his style. We like what he has to say. And so I used to write a lot of copy. Now I just talk in a podcast and I have other copywriters help me write the copy so that it goes out. Like Tony Robbins, he just does these amazing trainings, right? Yeah. He does his big arena trainings. Tony Robbins doesn't sit down and write copy. He's got copywriters that are really good at that. Gary Vaynerchuk and Elon Musk and Mark Cuban and all the sharks on Shark Tank, they don't write anything, but they have a brand manager. They have a copywriter that helps them write. They just get on camera and talk. Yeah. So to me, that became although that wasn't my initial intention, that's what it became for me. And I think it's critically important. Then if you have a specific audience that you want to talk to, like it could be military, people that are military veterans that want to invest in multifamily. That's a very niche group. The more niche, the better, right? Talk to a smaller audience and go deep with a smaller group, a small tribe that totally looks at you as their leader. That's the best way. If you want to monetize the podcast, that's the best way to do it.
I think you're hitting on so many core things that I really want to emphasize. And my brain's like running all over the place, but I think this idea of showing up and expressing something about who you are and having that represent your brand, that's the lesson I think any investor can take away from this, right? It's like, it's good to be unique and to be yourself and to show up and serve your community before you need to ask them for something, because that does so much more to pull people to you than you could possibly do otherwise. Josh, I was
here's one example, Dan. Like if you're not a Starlink customer of Elon Musk, or you don't buy a Tesla or fly in his rockets, have you ever done business with anything that Elon Musk owns? The answer is no, right? I don't own a Tesla. I've never flown in his rockets. I don't use his internet. I don't use his solar panels. But I follow Elon Musk because he has a voice. You know what he stands for. Mm-hmm. You know what he's up to. And so the podcast is essentially your kind of leadership platform His is more video, and he's on the like big news channels. He's probably getting news requests for interviews every day, all the time. But that has the podcast. If you're not Elon Musk, you have to have a place to start. I think the podcast is a perfect way to do it.
So for people who want to know more about you, I mean, obviously you are so active. So we've mentioned freelandventures.com. You can go there and check out a whole bunch of stuff that you guys are up to. We've mentioned acceleratedinvestorpodcast.com. So acceleratedinvestorpodcast.com. Where else do you want people to look you up? Are those the best places? Do you do social media? Like, where do you want people to find out more about you and what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the two best places for sure. Subscribe to my podcast, just like you subscribe to Dan's. That would be great because you'll hear direct from me. I'm all over social media, Facebook, several Facebook groups that we own, Instagram, LinkedIn. I'm on all those as well. But Freeland Ventures is really the core. There's links there to everything we do. There's links to our YouTube channel, there's links to our podcast, there's links to our portfolio, passive investing, our buying criteria. Everything is sitting on our main website, freelandventures.com. So I would just visit that, poke around, and take it from there.
Well, Josh Cantwell, I just want to say this has been, I don't know, man, this has been a pretty awesome freaking interview. I'm like super excited about it. I got a ton out of it. I know everybody else did too. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. This was a real blast. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, Dan. Thanks so much for having me on, man. My surgeon told me back when I had my surgery, he said, actually it was the oncologist talking about the surgeon. He said, Josh, your surgeon was daring. So I tell people, go out and be daring. Be daring. That's all the fun, all the excitement in life is on the other side of being daring and trying something new. So thanks a lot for having me on, Dan. I appreciate it.
That is it. That's it for this week's episode of the REI Marketing Nerds podcast. As always, you can go over to AdWordsNerds.com, click on podcast to see all of our show notes and past episodes. As always, it really means a lot to me that you are listening. And hey, if you could leave us a review wherever you downloaded this podcast, really means a lot. It helps other people find the show, and I read every single one. I hope you're having an awesome week. I'll talk to you soon. Cheers.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.